Sarah Mitchell pushed through the glass doors of Anyhow restaurant, her designer heels clicking against the polished marble floor. The upscale establishment buzzed with the quiet conversations of well-dressed diners, crystal glasses clinking softly in the background. She had chosen this place carefully for her business lunch with potential investors, knowing that first impressions mattered in her world of high-stakes real estate deals. The hostess, a young woman with tired eyes and a forced smile, approached her. "Good afternoon. Welcome to Anyhow restaurant. Do you have a reservation?" Sarah barely glanced at her, instead scanning the dining room for her guests. "Mitchell, party of 4. They should already be seated." Her tone carried the impatience of someone accustomed to getting what she wanted immediately. "Let me check our system," the hostess said, fingers dancing across the tablet. "I see the reservation, but your guests haven't arrived yet. Would you like to be seated at your table or wait at the bar?" "Obviously, I want to be seated," Sarah snapped, adjusting her expensive handbag. "And make sure the table has proper lighting. I have important documents to review." The hostess maintained her professional demeanor despite the rudeness. "Of course. Right this way, Ms. Mitchell." As they walked through the restaurant, Sarah's phone buzzed with notifications. Her real estate empire had grown exponentially over the past 5 years, built on her reputation for being ruthless in negotiations and dismissive of anyone she deemed beneath her status. She had climbed from a small-town girl to one of the city's most successful property developers. But the journey had hardened her heart and inflated her ego. The hostess led her to a prime table by the window, complete with a view of the city skyline. "Your server will be with you shortly. Can I get you started with anything to drink?" "Bring me your most expensive bottle of champagne," Sarah ordered without looking up from her phone. "And tell the kitchen I want everything to be perfect today. I'm entertaining very important clients." 20 minutes passed, and Sarah's guests still hadn't arrived. Her champagne sat untouched as she grew increasingly agitated, firing off angry text messages. The restaurant began to fill with the lunch crowd, and she noticed the staff moving efficiently between tables, attending to every customer's needs with genuine care. Her server, a middle-aged man named Robert, approached with a warm smile. "Good afternoon, Ms. Mitchell. I apologize for the wait. Are you ready to order, or would you prefer to wait for your party?" "They're obviously running late because they don't respect my time," Sarah muttered, then looked up at Robert with narrowed eyes. "What do you recommend for someone who actually matters in this city?" Robert's smile never wavered. "All of our guests matter equally here at Anyhow restaurant. Our chef's special today is the pan-seared salmon with herb risotto, and it's quite exceptional." Sarah rolled her eyes at his diplomatic response. "Fine, bring me that, and make sure it's cooked properly. I don't have time for mistakes." As Robert walked away, Sarah's attention was drawn to a commotion at a nearby table. An elderly gentleman had apparently spilled water on himself, and his server was helping him clean up with patience and kindness. The scene irritated Sarah further. She couldn't understand why the staff wasted so much energy on people who probably couldn't even afford to tip properly. Her phone rang, and she answered with her usual brusque tone. "This is Sarah. Ms. Mitchell, this is David Chen from Henderson Investments. I'm afraid we need to postpone today's lunch meeting. Something urgent has come up." Sarah's face flushed with anger. "You're canceling on me? Do you have any idea how valuable my time is? I've already ordered. I've already committed to this lunch." "I sincerely apologize. Perhaps we could reschedule for tomorrow?" "Tomorrow? I might not be available tomorrow. You people clearly don't understand how business works." She hung up without waiting for a response, her hands trembling with frustration. The champagne bottle sat mockingly in its silver bucket, a symbol of her wasted preparation and wounded pride. Sarah had built her entire identity around being important, being needed, being feared in business circles. The cancellation felt like a personal attack on everything she had worked to become. Robert returned with her salmon, perfectly plated and aromatic. Is there anything else I can bring you, Ms. Mitchell? You can bring me clients who actually show up, she muttered, stabbing at her food with unnecessary force. And turn up the air conditioning. It's stifling in here. I'll speak with the manager about the temperature, Robert replied patiently. As Sarah ate in solitude, she watched the restaurant's rhythm around her. Families laughed together, couples shared intimate conversations, business associates conducted meetings with mutual respect. Everyone seemed to be enjoying their experience, except her. The irony was lost on her. She had everything money could buy, but none of the genuine connections that made the other diners' meals meaningful. Her phone continued to buzz with work, calls and messages, each one demanding her immediate attention. She answered them all with increasing irritation, her voice carrying across the dining room and drawing disapproving glances from nearby tables. Sarah noticed the looks, but dismissed them as jealousy from people who couldn't understand the pressures of real success. The salmon was admittedly delicious, but Sarah was too consumed with anger to enjoy it properly. She had specifically chosen Anyhow Restaurant because of its reputation and exclusivity, expecting the perfect backdrop for closing a major deal. Instead, she found herself dining alone, surrounded by strangers who seemed to possess something she had lost along her climb to the top. Little did Sarah know that her behavior was being observed by someone who would soon change her perspective on life entirely. As Sarah finished her meal, she noticed a woman at the corner table who seemed oddly familiar. The woman was dining alone, dressed simply in a worn cardigan and faded jeans, her graying hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. There was something about her posture, the way she held her coffee cup, that tugged at Sarah's memory, though she couldn't place where she might have seen her before. The woman caught Sarah's stare and offered a gentle smile, the kind that reaches the eyes and speaks of genuine warmth. Sarah quickly looked away, uncomfortable with the unexpected connection. She had no interest in socializing with someone who clearly didn't belong in her social circle. Robert returned to clear her plate. "How was everything, Ms. Mitchell?" "Adequate," Sarah replied curtly, though the food had actually been excellent. "I need the check immediately. I have more important places to be." As Robert processed her payment, Sarah's phone rang again. This time it was her assistant with news that made her blood boil. "Ms. Mitchell, the Riverside project has hit another snag. The community board is demanding more public hearings before approving the demolition permits." "What do you mean, more hearings?" Sarah's voice rose, drawing attention from nearby diners. "I've already jumped through all their ridiculous hoops. These people are just trying to block progress because they're too stupid to understand development." The woman in the corner continued to watch Sarah with that same gentle expression, and it was beginning to unnerve her. Sarah ended the call abruptly and stood to leave, but as she passed the woman's table, she was stopped by a soft voice. "Excuse me, dear. You seem very stressed. Are you all right?" Sarah paused, taken aback by the stranger's concern. "I'm perfectly fine, thank you. Just dealing with incompetent people who don't understand business." "Business can be challenging," the woman agreed. "I remember those days well. Sometimes the most difficult part isn't the work itself, but remembering why we started in the first place." There was something in her tone that made Sarah hesitate. "I'm sorry. Do I know you? You seem familiar." The woman's smile deepened. "Perhaps. I'm Elena Rodriguez. I used to work in development myself many years ago." The name meant nothing to Sarah, but she found herself oddly drawn to continue the conversation. "Development? What kind of projects?" "Community housing, mostly. Affordable. Homes for families who needed them. It wasn't glamorous or profitable, but it was meaningful work." Elena's eyes held a distant look, as if remembering better times. Sarah scoffed. "Affordable housing? That's not real development. That's charity work dressed up as business. Real developers focus on projects that actually generate returns." "I see." Elena's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. "And how is that working out for you? You seem to carry a great deal of anger." The observation stung because it was true. Sarah felt constantly angry lately, at clients, at employees, at regulations, at anyone who stood in her way. I'm successful. That's what matters. Anger is just motivation in business. Is it? Elena asked quietly. Or is it perhaps the cost of forgetting who we used to be? Sarah felt an uncomfortable twist in her stomach. There was something unsettling about this woman's ability to see through her defenses. I don't know what you mean. I know exactly who I am. Do you? Elena stood slowly, gathering her simple purse and worn jacket. I wonder if the girl who first dreamed of building things that mattered would recognize the woman you've become. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. How could this stranger know about her childhood dreams of architecture, of creating beautiful spaces where families could thrive? She had buried those naive fantasies years ago when she learned that sentiment didn't pay the bills or command respect. You don't know anything about me, Sarah said defensively. Elena paused at her table, her hand resting lightly on the back of her chair. Perhaps not. But I know what it's like to lose yourself in the pursuit of what you think success should look like. I know the loneliness that comes from treating people as obstacles instead of human beings. I'm not lonely, Sarah protested. But even as she said it, she realized how hollow the words sounded. The young hostess who seated you, Elena continued, gently, works 2 jobs to support her sick mother. The server who brought your food has been saving for 3 years to visit his grandchildren overseas. The elderly gentleman who spilled his water earlier just lost his wife of 50 years and comes here because eating alone at home is too painful. Sarah felt a strange tightness in her chest. How do you know all that? Because I take the time to listen. Because I remember that every person I meet is fighting battles I know nothing about. Elena picked up her check and a generous tip from the table. Success isn't measured by how many people you can dismiss, dear. It's measured by how many lives you can touch with kindness. Sarah wanted to argue, to defend her approach to business and life, but something in Elena's demeanor silenced her. There was a quiet strength about this woman, a peace that Sarah hadn't felt in years. It was the kind of serenity she remembered from childhood, before competition and ambition had consumed her every thought. I should go, Elena said, moving toward the exit. But I hope you'll think about what I've said. The girl who dreamed of making a difference is still in there somewhere. Maybe it's time to let her breathe again. As Elena walked away, Sarah stood frozen by the table, her mind reeling. The brief encounter had shattered her composure more effectively than any business crisis ever had. For the first time in years, she found herself questioning not just her methods, but her entire philosophy of success. The restaurant continued its gentle bustle around her, but Sarah barely noticed. She was thinking about the young hostess with tired eyes, about Robert's patient professionalism despite her rudeness, about the elderly widower eating alone. When had she stopped seeing people as individuals and started viewing them merely as functions in her world? She walked slowly toward the exit, Elena's words echoing in her mind. The girl who dreamed of making a difference. Had that girl ever really existed, or was it just a childhood fantasy she had outgrown? And if she had existed, what had happened to her dreams of creating something meaningful rather than simply profitable? Sarah spent the rest of the afternoon in her glass-walled office, but her mind kept drifting back to Elena Rodriguez. The encounter had disturbed her more than she cared to admit, stirring up memories she had deliberately buried. She found herself staring out at the city skyline, seeing not opportunities for development, but the lives of the people living and working in those buildings. Her assistant knocked and entered without waiting for permission. Ms. Mitchell, I have the updated reports on the Riverside project. The community board wants to meet next week to discuss their concerns. What exactly are their concerns? Sarah asked, surprising herself with the question. Normally, she would have dismissed community input as irrelevant noise. They're worried about displacement of low-income families, loss of green space, and increased traffic congestion. Pretty standard stuff. Her assistant shrugged as if these concerns were trivial annoyances. Sarah nodded slowly, but Elena's words kept echoing in her mind. Every person I meet is fighting battles I know nothing about. Get me the demographics on the families currently living in that area. I want to know who we're displacing. Her assistant looked surprised. Since when do we care about that? The legal requirements for relocation assistance are minimal, and we're already exceeding them. Just get me the information, Sarah said, firmly. That evening, Sarah found herself driving through the Riverside neighborhood instead of heading straight home to her luxury penthouse. The area was older, with modest houses and small apartment buildings, but it had a sense of community she rarely saw in the upscale developments she usually created. Children played in small front yards while parents watched from porches, neighbors chatted over fence lines, and elderly residents walked slowly along tree-lined sidewalks. She parked her expensive car and walked among the people she was planning to displace. A young mother pushing a stroller smiled and nodded at her. An elderly man tending his garden looked up and waved. These weren't obstacles to her success. They were real people with real lives, just as Elena had said. At the corner grocery store, she overheard a conversation between two women discussing the proposed development. "My family has lived here for 30 years, one said. "I don't know where we'll go if they tear everything down. The apartments they're offering as replacements are twice as expensive." "At least you own your place," the other replied. "I'm just renting, so I'll get nothing when they demolish our building. My kids will have to change schools, leave all their friends." Sarah felt a knot forming in her stomach. These were the real consequences of her successful projects. Broken communities, displaced families, children forced to start over. She had always justified her work by focusing on the economic benefits, the job creation, the tax revenue, but she had never considered the human cost. The next morning, Sarah did something she had never done before. She researched Elena Rodriguez. What she found left her stunned. Elena hadn't just worked in affordable housing. She had been a pioneer in community-centered development, winning numerous awards for projects that revitalized neighborhoods without displacing existing residents. Her work had been featured in architectural magazines and urban planning journals as models of ethical development. More shocking still, Elena had once been wealthy and successful, running a major development company before transitioning to nonprofit work. The articles painted a picture of a woman who had chosen purpose over profit, community impact over personal gain. Sarah found an interview from 10 years earlier where Elena explained her career change. "I realized I was building monuments to my own ego rather than homes for human beings," Elena had said. "Success means nothing if it comes at the expense of other people's well-being. I wanted to use my skills to heal communities, not destroy them." Sarah closed her laptop, feeling as if she had been looking at a mirror showing a possible future version of herself. Elena had walked the same path Sarah was on, had achieved the same kind of ruthless success, but had found the courage to change direction. The question was whether Sarah possessed that same courage. That afternoon, she called an emergency meeting with her development team regarding the Riverside project. Her architects and project managers gathered in the conference room, expecting routine updates and strategy discussions. "I want to completely redesign the Riverside development," Sarah announced, shocking everyone in the room. "Redesign it how?" her lead architect asked. "We're already past the preliminary approval stage. I want to incorporate affordable housing units, preserve the existing green spaces, and design around the current community rather than replacing it entirely." The room erupted in protests. Her project manager was the first to voice what everyone was thinking. "That will cut our profit margins by at least 60%. The investors will never approve such changes. Then we find different investors, Sarah said, her voice gaining strength. Or we restructure the project entirely. Sarah, are you feeling all right? Her business partner asked. This isn't like you at all. These kinds of changes will make us the laughingstock of the industry. Maybe the industry needs to be laughed at, Sarah replied. Maybe we've all forgotten what we're supposed to be building and why. Her team exchanged worried glances. Some began making arguments about market viability, return on investment, and competitive positioning. But Sarah found herself thinking about the children playing in the riverside neighborhood, about the elderly man tending his garden, about the young mother who smiled at a stranger. I know this seems sudden, Sarah said, interrupting the financial objections, but I've realized that we've been measuring success by the wrong metrics. Yes, we make money. Yes, we deliver projects on time and within budget. But what legacy are we actually leaving? Her marketing director spoke up. Our legacy is economic growth, job creation, and urban revitalization. These are good things, Sarah. At what cost? Sarah asked. If we revitalize a neighborhood by forcing out the families who made it a community, have we really improved anything? Or have we just moved the problem somewhere else? The meeting ended with no resolution, but Sarah knew she had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. Her team thought she was having some kind of breakdown, but for the first time in years, she felt like she was waking up rather than falling apart. That evening, she returned to Anyhow restaurant, hoping to find Elena again. She needed to understand how someone makes such a dramatic life change, how they find the strength to rebuild their entire identity around different values. The hostess recognized her and seemed surprised by her polite greeting and genuine smile, but Elena wasn't there, and Sarah realized she might never see the woman again. However, something had fundamentally shifted inside her during their brief conversation, and there was no going back to the person she had been before. 3 weeks passed, and Sarah's world turned upside down. Her business partners threatened to buy her out if she continued pursuing what they called charity work disguised as development. Half of her staff quit, unable to understand her sudden change in direction. The investors in the Riverside project withdrew their funding, calling her new vision financially irresponsible. Sarah found herself sitting in her office late one evening, staring at resignation letters and legal documents. Her empire was crumbling, and everyone around her seemed to think she had lost her mind. The financial pressure was enormous, but something deeper troubled her. The loneliness that Elena had identified was now glaringly obvious. She had built her success on keeping people at arm's length, treating relationships as transactions and emotions as weaknesses. Now, when she needed support and understanding the most, she realized she had no one to turn to. Her colleagues saw her as a business asset or liability. Her few remaining friends were more interested in her connections than her well-being. Even her family had grown distant over the years, pushed away by her constant focus on work and status. Late that night, Sarah walked through the city streets, something she hadn't done in years. She usually traveled everywhere by car or private driver, insulated from the reality of urban life. But now she found herself among the people she had spent so long dismissing: night shift workers heading home, homeless individuals seeking shelter, young couples sharing quiet moments on park benches. She passed a small community center that was still lit up despite the late hour. Through the windows, she could see a woman teaching what appeared to be an evening literacy class. Adult students of various ages sat around tables, working intently on their lessons. The scene struck her as beautiful. People investing in their futures, learning and growing together. On impulse, Sarah pushed open the door and walked inside. The teacher looked up with surprise but no annoyance at the interruption. "Can I help you?" the woman asked kindly. "I'm sorry to bother you so late. I was just walking by and saw your class. What kind of program is this?" "We teach basic literacy and job skills to adults who never had the opportunity to finish their education," the teacher explained. Many of our students are working multiple jobs during the day, so we hold evening sessions. Sarah looked around the room at the faces of the students, tired but determined, hopeful despite their circumstances. How is this program funded? We rely on donations and volunteer work mostly. The community center lets us use the space for free, and our teachers volunteer their time. It's not much, but we're helping people build better lives for themselves and their families. One of the students, a middle-aged woman with calloused hands and gentle eyes, spoke up. This program changed my life. I was cleaning offices for 15 years without being able to read properly. Now I'm studying to become a teaching assistant myself. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes, a sensation she hadn't experienced in years. That's incredible. You should be proud of yourselves, all of you. As she walked home that night, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the determination she had witnessed. These people were building something meaningful with almost no resources, while she had been using enormous resources to build monuments to her own ego. The next morning brought another crisis. Her remaining business partner demanded an immediate meeting to discuss dissolving their partnership. Sarah arrived at the office to find him packing up his personal belongings. "I can't watch you destroy everything we've worked for," he said without looking at her. "The Riverside project was supposed to be our biggest success. Instead, you've turned it into a financial disaster." "What if there's a better way to measure success?" Sarah asked quietly. "Better than profit? Better than growth?" "Sarah, we're business people, not social workers. If you want to help poor people, write them a check and get back to doing what you do best." After he left, Sarah sat alone in her office, surrounded by the trappings of her former life. Awards and recognition certificates covered the walls. Photos showed her at groundbreaking ceremonies and ribbon cuttings, always smiling for the cameras, but never looking genuinely happy. Her phone rang, interrupting her melancholy. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. Sarah Mitchell speaking. "Ms. Mitchell, this is Maria Santos. I work at the Riverside Community Center. I heard about your proposed changes to the development project, and I was wondering if we could meet." Sarah's heart rate quickened. "Of course. When would be convenient for you?" "Actually, we're having a community meeting tonight to discuss the development plans. Would you be willing to come and hear directly from the people who would be affected?" Sarah had never attended a community meeting in her entire career. She had always relied on surveys, demographic data, and reports prepared by others. The idea of facing the residents directly was both terrifying and intriguing. "I'll be there," she said. That evening, Sarah walked into a crowded gymnasium filled with residents from the Riverside neighborhood. Children played in corners while their parents discussed serious topics. Elderly residents sat in folding chairs, their faces lined with worry. The scene was nothing like the sterile boardroom meetings she was accustomed to. Maria Santos turned out to be the woman who had been teaching the literacy class. She welcomed Sarah warmly and introduced her to the crowd, explaining her revised development plans. The response was mixed. Some residents were skeptical, having been disappointed by developers before. Others were cautiously optimistic about the possibility of improvement without displacement. But all of them were willing to engage in honest dialogue about their needs and concerns. "My family has owned our little grocery store for 20 years, one man said. "We're afraid that new development will bring in big chains that will put us out of business." "Our kids walk to school every day," a young mother added. "The increased traffic from bigger buildings could make that dangerous." "But we also need better housing options," an elderly woman pointed out. "Some of our buildings are falling apart and we can't afford repairs." Sarah listened to each concern, taking notes and asking clarifying questions. These weren't obstacles to overcome or problems to dismiss. They were legitimate needs that deserved thoughtful solutions. Halfway through the meeting, Sarah noticed a familiar figure entering the gymnasium. Elena Rodriguez walked quietly to an empty chair near the back, offering Sarah an encouraging smile when their eyes met. Seeing Elena again filled Sarah with both relief and nervousness. After the meeting ended and most residents had gone home, Sarah approached Elena with hesitation. "I didn't expect to see you here," Sarah said. "This is my neighborhood," Elena replied simply. "I live just 3 blocks away in one of those apartments you're planning to renovate." Sarah stared at her in shock. "You live here? But I mean, your background in development." Elena laughed softly. "You thought someone with my experience would live somewhere more upscale? This is exactly where I choose to be, dear. This is where the real work happens." Elena invited Sarah for coffee at a small cafe near the community center, a place where locals gathered and everyone seemed to know each other. As they sat at a worn wooden table, Sarah finally asked the question that had been haunting her since. "Their first meeting?" "How did you know?" Sarah began hesitantly. "That day at the restaurant. How did you know exactly what I needed to hear?" Elena stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "Because I was you 20 years ago. Same anger, same loneliness, same feeling that the whole world was against me. I built my success by building walls around my heart. But you seemed to have it all figured out. You were so calm, so sure of yourself." "Oh, I was far from having it figured out," Elena laughed. "My transformation didn't happen overnight. It took years of making mistakes, hurting people, and eventually losing everything I thought mattered." Sarah leaned forward, eager to understand. "What happened? What made you change?" Elena's expression grew distant. "I was developing a luxury shopping complex that required demolishing a historic neighborhood. The residents fought us for 2 years, but I had better lawyers and deeper pockets. I won, legally speaking." She paused, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup. "The day before demolition began, a young girl knocked on my office door. She was maybe 10 years old with her grandmother. They lived in one of the houses we were tearing down." Sarah felt her chest tighten as Elena continued. "The little girl handed me a drawing she had made of her house, with her family standing in front of it. She said, 'This is where I learned to ride my bike and where my mom read me stories. Could you please let us stay?' Her grandmother just stood there, crying quietly." Elena's voice became softer. "I had security escort them out. I told myself it was business, that progress required difficult decisions." The next morning, demolition began on schedule. What happened to them? They moved in with relatives across town. The girl had to change schools, leave all her friends. 6 months later, I learned that the grandmother had died. The stress of losing her home, the disruption to her life. The family blamed the move for accelerating her decline. Sarah felt sick to her stomach. She could see herself making the same cold calculations, the same justifications. "That's when I realized what I had become," Elena said. "I was so focused on building things that I had forgotten about building lives, building communities. I was destroying the very fabric that makes places worth living in." "So you walked away from everything?" "Not immediately. First, I tried to convince myself that the grandmother's death was a coincidence, that I wasn't responsible. But the guilt ate at me. I started paying attention to the real impact of my projects. Every displaced family, every closed business, every community torn apart." Elena looked directly at Sarah. "The breaking point came when I realized I had become someone my younger self would have despised. The idealistic girl who wanted to design beautiful spaces for families to thrive would have been horrified by the woman I had become." Sarah recognized the feeling. "How did you find the courage to change? Weren't you terrified of giving up everything you had built?" Terrified doesn't begin to describe it. I was 52 years old, wealthy but miserable, successful but completely alone. Starting over meant admitting that my entire adult life had been built on the wrong foundation. But you did it anyway. I did it because continuing on the same path meant certain spiritual death. I was already dying inside, one ruthless decision at a time. At least changing direction offered the possibility of finding meaning again. Elena reached across the table and placed her hand gently on Sarah's. The hardest part was learning to forgive myself. I had to accept that I couldn't undo the harm I had caused, but I could dedicate the rest of my life to doing better. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. I don't know if I'm strong enough to give up everything I've worked for. You don't have to give up everything, Elena said gently. You have skills, experience, and resources that could do tremendous good. The question is whether you're willing to redefine what success means. Over the next hour, Elena shared stories of her transition. She had sold her company and used the proceeds to start a non-profit focused on community-centered development. She had moved to Riverside 5 years earlier, not as a developer studying the area, but as a resident committed to its improvement. I live here because this is where I can make the biggest difference, Elena explained. I know my neighbors. I shop at the local grocery store. I attend school board meetings. When I work on development projects now, I'm not imposing solutions from the outside. I'm part of the community finding solutions together. Sarah marveled at the transformation. Don't you miss the luxury, the status, the recognition? I thought. I would, but I discovered something better. I have genuine relationships now. People trust me because I've proven that their well-being matters more to me than my profit margins. When I wake up each morning, I know that my work is making life better for people I care about. Elena showed Sarah photos on her phone. Community, gardens she had helped design, affordable housing projects that preserved neighborhood character, a children's playground built through collaboration between residents and local businesses. These projects don't make me rich, Elena said, but they make me proud. Every family that stays in their community, every small business that thrives, every child who has a safe place to play, these are my real achievements now. As they prepared to leave, Elena made an offer that would change Sarah's life forever. I know you're facing pressure to abandon your new vision for the Riverside project, Elena said. What if I told you there was another way? What if we could work together to create something that serves both the community's needs and your desire to build something meaningful? Sarah looked at her with surprise and hope. You would work with me? Even after everything I've done wrong? Especially because of everything you've done wrong, Elena smiled. You understand the development world in ways I never could. Together we could create a model that other developers might actually follow. But I've lost most of my funding. My partners have abandoned me, and my reputation in the industry is in ruins. Your reputation in the old industry, perhaps. But there's a whole world of impact investors, community development financial institutions, and socially conscious organizations that would be thrilled to support truly innovative development. Sarah felt a spark of excitement for the first time in weeks. You really think we could make it work? I know we could, Elena said confidently. But only if you're truly ready to leave your old definition of success behind. Only if you're willing to measure your worth by the lives you improve rather than the profits you generate. Sarah took a deep breath, looking around the cafe at the faces of people who had welcomed her into their community. For the first time in her adult life, she felt like she belonged somewhere that mattered. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the same spot where she had first met Elena at Anyhow Restaurant, but everything about her had changed. Gone was the expensive designer outfit and the air of superiority. She wore comfortable jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Most importantly, her eyes held a warmth and peace that had been absent for years. She was meeting with a documentary filmmaker who wanted to tell the story of the Riverside Project, which had become a national model for community-centered development. The same hostess who had greeted her months earlier approached with a genuine smile. Ms. Mitchell, welcome back. Your usual table? Sarah was surprised the young woman remembered her, especially given how rudely she had behaved during their first encounter. You remember me? Of course, the hostess replied. though you seem so different now. Much happier." As Sarah waited at her table, she reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. The Riverside project had nearly bankrupted her initially, but working with Elena had opened doors to a completely different world of funding and support. Impact investors, community development organizations, and even some forward-thinking traditional developers had rallied behind their innovative approach. The project itself had become something neither Sarah nor Elena could have imagined alone. Instead of displacing existing residents, they had created affordable housing options within the same buildings, allowing families to stay in their neighborhood while improving their living conditions. Local businesses were given priority leasing arrangements in new commercial spaces. Green areas were expanded rather than eliminated, creating gathering places for the community. Most importantly, residents had been partners in every decision rather than obstacles to overcome. Monthly community meetings had evolved into ongoing collaboration sessions where neighbors worked together to solve problems and plan improvements. Sarah had learned more about effective development in those meetings than in all her years of corporate training. The financial results had surprised everyone, including Sarah. While profit margins were lower than her previous projects, the development was fully occupied with a waiting list. Local businesses were thriving, and property values in the surrounding area had increased significantly. More importantly, family displacement had been virtually eliminated, and community cohesion had strengthened rather than fractured. Robert, the server who had patiently endured her previous rudeness, approached her table with a warm smile. "Good. Afternoon, Ms. Mitchell. It's wonderful to see you again." "Robert, I owe you an apology," Sarah said immediately. "The way I treated you during my last visit was inexcusable. You showed me kindness and professionalism, and I responded with arrogance and disrespect." Robert looked genuinely touched. "Thank you for saying that, but it's not necessary. We all have difficult days." "It wasn't just a difficult day," Sarah insisted. "It was a difficult life. But people like you and Elena helped me find a better way to live." The documentary filmmaker arrived shortly after, a young woman named Jessica who had been following community development stories across the country. She had heard about the Riverside project through social media posts from residents who were sharing their positive experiences. "I have to admit, when I first heard about a luxury developer switching to affordable housing, I was skeptical," Jessica said as she set up her recording equipment. "I thought it might be a publicity stunt or a one-time guilt project." Sarah laughed. "I understand the skepticism. 6 months ago, I would have been skeptical too. But working with Elena and the Riverside community taught me that sustainable development isn't just better for people, it's better for business too." "How so?" "When residents are partners instead of obstacles, projects go more smoothly. When you're building for real community needs instead of abstract market demand, you create spaces that people actually want to live and work in. When local businesses thrive, the entire area becomes more valuable." Jessica was intrigued. "But surely you're making less money than before." "I'm making less money per project, but I'm making it more consistently and with much less stress," Sarah explained. "I don't spend my time fighting community opposition or dealing with half-empty buildings. More importantly, I sleep well at night knowing that my work is improving lives rather than disrupting them." As they talked, Sarah noticed Elena entering the restaurant. She waved her over to join the interview, and Elena's presence immediately brought a sense of completeness to the conversation. "Elena is the real story here," Sarah told Jessica. "She's the one who showed me that success and compassion aren't mutually exclusive." Elena settled into her chair with characteristic grace. "Sarah is being too modest. The courage to change her entire life approach, that came from within her. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time to offer some perspective." Jessica asked Elena about her own transformation years earlier, and Elena shared her story with the same honesty she had shown Sarah that first night at the cafe. As she spoke, Sarah marveled again at the strength it had taken for Elena to rebuild her life around different values. What would you say to other developers who might be considering a similar change? Jessica asked. Elena and Sarah exchanged glances, and Sarah spoke first. I would say that the fear of change is real, but the cost of not changing is higher. I was successful in conventional terms, but I was also angry, lonely, and spiritually empty. I thought those were just the prices of success. But they don't have to be, Elena added. There are ways to build wealth while building community, to create profit while creating value for people's lives. It requires different metrics and different methods, but it's absolutely possible. And the results speak for themselves, Sarah continued. The Riverside Project has inspired similar developments in 3 other cities. We're consulting on projects that prioritize community input and affordable housing integration. We're proving that ethical development can be profitable development. As the interview concluded, Jessica asked one final question. Sarah, what would you say to your former self, the woman who walked into this restaurant 6 months ago? Sarah thought carefully before answering. I would tell her that the girl who dreamed of creating beautiful spaces for families was right, and the woman who forgot those dreams was wrong. I would tell her that success without compassion is just elaborate failure, and that the most profitable investment she could make would be in understanding the people her work affects. And, Sarah added with a smile, I would tell her to pay attention to the wisdom of strangers, because sometimes the most important conversations happen with people you least expect to learn from. After Jessica left, Sarah and Elena sat together, over coffee, planning their next project and reflecting on how much their lives had changed. Elena had become not just a business partner, but the closest friend Sarah had ever had. Their collaboration had evolved into a consulting firm that helped other developers integrate community needs into profitable projects. Do you ever regret it? Sarah asked Elena. Giving up the wealth and status you had before? Elena considered the question seriously. I regret the harm I caused during my first career, but I don't regret changing direction. I have something now that no amount of money could buy, the knowledge that my life has meaning beyond my own success. Sarah nodded, understanding completely. She had discovered that the emptiness she had felt for years wasn't the price of success. It was the symptom of pursuing the wrong kind of success. Building communities instead of just buildings, creating homes instead of just investments, measuring impact by lives improved rather than profits maximized, this had filled the void that luxury and status never could. As they prepared to leave, Sarah looked around Anyhow Restaurant one more time. This was where her transformation had begun, with a chance encounter and a stranger's compassion. Now it felt like a sacred place, a reminder that life could change in an instant if you were brave enough to listen to wisdom and act on it. Elena had been right that first day. The girl who dreamed of making a difference had still been there, waiting to breathe again. And now, finally, she was alive and thriving, building the better world she had always imagined.